Welcome to the Coming Clean podcast with your host, Peter O. Estevez.
Hit a dash in my position, you will never last. Real talk, I had to get it from the mall. Real talk, now I'm vibing with a bankroll. Cash.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Coming Clean. Today we have an incredible human being, the current CEO of the Hollis Company, the fastest growing media company in the planet. Former president of theatrical distribution for the Disney Company, and responsible for the launching of some of the most dominant films in the franchise industry of the world, such as Avengers series, Star Wars, Frozen, Beauty and the Beast, and of course, he also orchestrated the release of 9 of the 10 highest grossing films of all time. Wow. The author of Get Out of Your Own Way, A Skeptic's Guide for Growing and Fulfillment, a husband, a father of 3 beautiful children, and an incredible daughter, Noah, who makes fun news every day on social media, and went on to build an incredible company with his famously wife, Rachel Hollis. How are you, David? Thank you for joining us.
Peter, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience. And in these trying times where we are all hungry for more knowledge, for more information, something that is positive, something that helps us grow and evolve and change in these times where we need it more than ever. And you do that very well through social media, with your team, with your wife, in all the companies that you're building. Tell us a little bit about that, and how did you get here? How did you go from Disney to taking Rachel's company from 6 employees to 60 employees and several companies that have an audience of millions of people across the world?
Well, I grew up inside of traditional entertainment. I spent the last 17 years of the life I had before the one that we're currently living at the Walt Disney Company, where in those 17 years, I had a variety of jobs. I had 11 or 12 jobs in those 17 years. The last 7 of those years, I spent as the head of sales for the movie studio, as you described, putting movies in theaters. And man, I had such an amazing time inside of traditional entertainment. But in some ways, the unbelievable nature of that environment that I was living in, where the intellectual property was so amazing, the teams, the greatest on the planet, the leadership, some of the best in any company in any time, those things come together, made the work that I was doing as that leader of sales not as challenging as it was when I first came into the role. When I first came in, it was Disney product. The acquisition of Pixar meant Disney and Pixar. The acquisition of Marvel and then Lucas meant that now the Avengers series and the Star Wars series was a part of what I was selling. And in some interesting ways, all of that talent, all of those great films made me trying to convince movie theaters to take that product, a thing that any of us could have in some ways done, because man, they need those big movies. And so at the same time that I was trying to figure out what might I put myself in front of to challenge myself in the future, my wife had for 15 years been building a company that had as its mission equipping people with tools to help them change their life. And it was at a tipping point, because she, in having built the community over time and serving them well the way that she had some books that over time were changing the way that the scaling of that business felt like it was coming to a tipping point. And as much as she has always been the creative, the visionary, she was at a place where she needed someone to be the balance to her creativeness with some operations, some integrator kind of skills. And so we started having a conversation maybe 3-4 years ago about what it might look like one day for us to go do this work together, to pair some of my practical operational superpowers with her visionary creative superpowers, to have them come together like the Avengers and take this work that she was doing, putting tools in people's hands, to another level. And so 2 years ago, almost to the day, we made this transition, leaving California and behind the entertainment business that I'd been part of in traditional corporate environments, to work in this entrepreneurial startup kind of space where, to your point, We started with just a few employees, and over the last couple of years, scaled this business to now 60 employees, and a business that includes live events and digital education products, both that we sell direct to consumer and that live in places like Target or through partnerships with people like QVC. A variety of different businesses, all of which exist, again, to impact people's lives, to try and equip them with tools that if they were to use them, maybe makes the things that they're struggling through or the pain that they're carrying less, in a way that affords them to have a life of more.
Incredible. Now, Dave, you come from a completely different background. You come from a corporate world where there's unlimited budgets, and you come to somewhat what is a growing company, but it's still a small business in comparison to the budgets that you're dealing with, right? And you also come from a world where there's a lot of egos at play. And from some of the research that I've done, you were somewhat of a skeptic on personal development, personal growth. Okay, how was that adjustment, that transition into this new space?
Well, to the first part of the question, I definitely came out of these more traditional spaces thinking that the work I did had perfect application to the work I do. And the reality is, what got me here will not get me there. It has, yes, there's a place for the experiences that I've had and some of the insight that I've experienced inside of these bigger conglomerate, big corporate kind of environments. But man, there is such a wild difference to running and operating a small business than there was inside of the space that I came from. And that was very jarring at the beginning of the transition from this life I knew to this life I now live. And part of it was just shedding some of the muscle memory that governed how I led teams, how I thought about problem solving, how I processed failure. At the very beginning, I'll be honest, when I was in this role and in a small business, we're doing a little bit more of, I would call it trailblazing than my previous existence, which was a lot more trail management, right? The problems that we'd run into were problems that we'd always run into, and the people who were solving those problems had solved them over the course of time for decades and decades. And so when problems came up in that old environment, I was usually being made aware of them as a leader when they'd already been taken care of, with a little bit of the insight in how they'd applied the same kind of remedy, the same kind of salve that they previously put on it. And good news, it's taken care of. Don't worry about it, boss. And here in this trailblazing kind of thing that happens in small business, where you're walking into a new part of the forest or down a path that you haven't previously traversed, you don't know if you're going to slip. You don't know if there's a hole. You don't know if there's a branch that's laying across the path. And so as we stumbled our way through learning new parts of new businesses, at first I took very personally the possibility that I was not the best person to be in the role because of the way that we were experiencing setbacks or failures in as frequent a time that we were. And it took being in the business for a long enough time. It took finding other people who themselves were more experienced in running small businesses to normalize that, yep, this is just the price of entry. That if you want to scale a small business, it comes with the reality that you, in fact, are going to trip and fall and learn from having tripped and fallen to become the business that you'd like to become. There is no shortcut. It's totally normal. It's not you. It's your decision to work in a small business.
Perfect. Now, how did that impact your relationship with Rachel?
Oh man, I'll tell you what, if you are listening to this and you have thought about working with your partner, just, prepare yourself, prepare your heart. It is, man, it's been like 2 of the greatest years of our entire life. We are 2 weeks away from our 16th wedding anniversary, and all of the time that we've been married, the last 2 years have singularly been the best and the hardest. And so the good news is I can hold both. I can hold that we have experienced the best 2 years of our life, and that we have experienced the hardest 2 years of our marriage, because the decision to work together introduces the reality that we are all people that have ego as a part of our makeup, that we, in some of that ego, are inevitably going to step on some of the things that previously were afforded a separation in our relationship that now, because of us working together, just live together. And so we had to do a lot of work on role clarity, role definition, right? Like the idea of finding a way to have each of us come together in a way that amplifies our superpowers and minimizes the downside of those superpowers was the intended goal. And so really getting clear on, where does my superpower live, start, stop? Where does her superpower live, start, stop? And how do we keep separation in a way that affords each of them to thrive in a way that doesn't have us clashing unnecessarily? What's interesting is, in a role that I play, where I am an integrator operator, and the role that she plays, visionary, creative, there is an expected clashing that has to happen in order to produce fruit, right? And so we, in some interesting ways, where we historically didn't have that kind of constructive conflict as a part of our relationship, were uncomfortable with it existing on the frequency that it was existing when we first were experiencing it as a thing that was necessary to drive the business. And then we just got used to it, right? And so part of it is, in one way, embracing it again as being kind of just the price of entry, but two, adopting things like radical candor. There's this great book by Kim Scott called Radical Candor, this idea that if you care about being in relationship with someone, that when they deviate from their represented personal values or the mission of the team, that because of the way that you care about them, you have a responsibility of having a conversation that may in fact be hard, but necessary to bring their self-awareness to a place where they can appreciate how they've deviated from their intended goal. Well, when you're married and you want to still make out at the end of a workday, sometimes pushing into and having that hard conversation, that can be a hard thing, but we had to commit to it. And in committing to it, the frequency of those kind of conversations minimize them feeling like they were going to derail our interest in pursuing an exceptional relationship. And it gets better every day. The reality, though, is for anyone who's listening, if you decide to go into work with your partner, your person, your best friend, you will be on a forever journey of figuring out how to work well with them, because it's a thing that will take the rest of your time in life, figuring it out how to do it well.
Absolutely, because now you're spending 24/7 together, period.
Yeah.
Dave, last year you celebrated your 15 wedding anniversary. And you brought that back to my memory, as you said, you're 2 years and you're going to celebrate your 16th wedding anniversary. And when you did a recollection of what were the most pivotal moments of your life, for you was a 29 of 29. For Rachel was that special 15-year anniversary in Ireland.
Yeah.
About 29. And how did that went over to Rachel?
It's so funny. We have a circle of friends. It's the end of the year. We're like reminiscing about what the highlights of our year were. And as each person is going around, I am next to last. Rachel goes last. I go just before her. And I recall the story of our decision to push ourselves into this environment to climb a mountain over and over and over until we have replicated the linear feet that would equal climbing Mount Everest, 29,029 feet. And it was one of these things where, in us putting ourselves into an environment that stretched beyond the bounds of what we previously thought ourselves to be capable of, it redefined what we believe ourselves to be capable of, right? In climbing up this mountain, it was a 36-hour time frame during which you had to scale 13 times up and down this hill. And each of these ascents took an hour and 45 or so minutes of the most grueling, I mean, the hardest workout I've ever experienced in my entire life at altitude. So you're just like uphill, steep pitch, one step after the next, climbing. And once you get to the top, you come back down and you just have to go right back up. And we finished this challenge in 35 hours. We finished it after, in about a third of the way through, I thinking that there was no possible way I could complete it. In having completed it, I reframed what I believed myself capable of completing. And the reason why at the end of the year, I look back on it as the most important thing that I experienced for the year, when I came off the mountain, the way that I thought about what I could handle physically was now completely changed. What I thought of what I could handle mentally completely changed. And as I got back into my regular workout routine, the week before we went on the mountain, I ran on a Sunday for about 45 minutes, did about 5 miles, that was kind of the thing that I did on a Sunday. But after having done 13 consecutive hour and 45-minute workouts, that following Sunday, I got back out on the road to go running, and the idea of only running for 45 minutes seemed crazy against the backdrop of what I knew myself to be capable of a week earlier. And so I, for 19 consecutive weekends following this climb, ran a half marathon every single Sunday. And why did I do that? Because I knew that I could. Because I now had a reframed sense of what I was capable of. And in knowing what I was capable of, I just decided to do what I knew myself to be able to do. And man, it was awesome. Now, yes, Rachel went immediately after I did. She reminisced about this beautifully romantic remarriage ceremony that happened on the side of a mountain in Ireland. And I wish that she had gone just before me, because of course I would have confirmed that that was the most important moment and that my mountain climbing experience was a close number 2.
But absolutely, that experience has changed you tremendously. One of your quotes that you have said a couple of times, that I heard you say a couple of times, is test the hypothesis of your truth.
Yeah, what's interesting in having just regaled the fact that I have been running as much as I have been in this last year, I lived in this belief that because I am a tall human being, I'm 6'4", maybe 6 with the mohawk, I was not someone that had an ability to run, right? A story had been told to me that tall people, because of their back, their hips, their knees, were not people who should run. And I accepted this story told to me through the lens of someone else's fear as my truth. And for 36 years of time, I did not test the hypothesis of this truth that had been given to me from someone else through the lens of my own experience. And then one day I was challenged to run a race by someone who I happened to work with, who happened to be a little bit older. And through my competitive juices, I was like, you know what? Tall people may not be able to run, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to show this whippersnapper that I can do this. I am going to get out on the road and I'm going to run. And he challenged me to a 5K, 3 miles. And I did these 3 miles and I was fine. My back didn't hurt. My knees were fine. My hips were okay. And for the first time in my life at 36, I tested the hypothesis of my truth. And in doing so, it made me question, what other stories have I believed that just in having believed them but not tested them, maybe have limited me from doing or being something that I was put on this planet to be. And one of the things I had to do, and one of the things I will challenge you, listener, to do, is to question the source that has given you the story that you have accepted as your truth, right? The source for me in this story, I had to ask, is the source credible? Right? Is it a credible source from which this story comes from? And the answer for me, it turns out, was that yes, it was a credible source. It happened to have come from my mother. I love my mom. She's an amazing human being, still is, and was for the entirety of those 36 years, where whether it was intentional or not, she helped reinforce the story that tall people can't run. Then I had to ask, and the question you'll have to ask, does she have credibility on this topic? Right. And the reality is, though she is a credible source in my life, she is neither a runner nor a person who is tall. And so because she's not a runner or someone who's tall, she's disqualified as a credible source when it comes to whether or not I, as a tall person, can run. I am now free from that story. I will now test the hypothesis of my own truth. And having tested it, I can tell you, I am a runner. I am a tall runner. I run fast and I can run far. I've now done marathons. I'm getting ready for an Ironman. Like, running is part of who I am. And I would not have known it had not been for the fact that I had to test the hypothesis of someone else's truth that was given to me through the lens of their fear, and accept and see through my own experience what my true capabilities are.
You know, Dave, you're a fascinating individual, and a lot of the things that you have done, a lot of the changes and transformation you have done has become, as of late, you know, as I don't know if it was a seeking that you went into, a transformation path that you went into. I'm fascinated by what I call, and what's been called, negative visualization. You talked about sitting around talking to your three children and talking about, you know, what you were the most afraid of. you want to tell us that story? Because when I heard that story the first time, boy, it was fascinating to me. And that's why we're here, because you're such a fascinating individual, and you are almost reprogramming yourself, retooling yourself, re-engineering yourself. And I find that very fascinating. And I think that this is the perfect time for each of us to look at ourselves, to take a personal inventory and say, what is it that I have been doing that is not helping me move forward, that I can change today? Today, when the universe has paused and given me an opportunity to reach deeper.
Yeah. So I had a very interesting, there's kind of like the first half of my adult life and the rest of my life, right? I lived a very, very good life. I am blessed and I have privilege for a whole host of amazing things having happened. And yet at this threshold between 30 and 40, I found myself stuck. I went through, I think the clinical term is a midlife crisis. I was doing well, but not feeling the way that someone who is doing well ought to feel in terms of being fulfilled. And so in the midst of this transition from 30 to 40, right around my 40th birthday, as I am asking now some bigger questions in the existential frame of why I'm on this planet and what the heck have I been afforded these gifts, this potential for, but am not in a position where I am fully utilizing it, I find myself in the backyard with my children in our jacuzzi asking questions in a nightly game of Ask Dad Anything. And my kids at the time are 9, 7, and 4. They are 3 boys. And the questions are usually the gross, disgusting kind of things that boys ask their dads when they're hanging out in a jacuzzi. And yet on this evening, my middle son, 7 years old, asks, what are you most afraid of? And he's fishing for, spiders or scorpions. Like he wants something that he can laugh at and out of my mouth falls, not living up to my potential, right? And it was a subconscious thing that became conscious in that moment as it fell out of my mouth. And in real time, I recognized, wow, I am living into my greatest fear. I am showing up and checking boxes and staying comfortable at the expense of fully utilizing the gifts that I've been afforded. And in doing so, I am living into my greatest fear. And in doing so, I am guaranteeing that my pursuit of fulfillment is compromised. And so I had to think about how I might engineer the motivation to fully unlock and tap into the potential that exists inside of my being. And while there are many of you that I'm sure can stay motivated by positive visualization, right? You cast a vision of where you want to go 10, 20 years from now, and the idealized version of you showing up well is a thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. I am not that person, right? I, at 40 years old, cast a very, very clear picture, like a motion picture kind of version of this picture of my 60th birthday party, where in visualizing my 60th birthday party 20 years in the future, I could see my then 29, 27, and 24-year-old trio of boys sitting around this table, where at my birthday party, they have been asked to raise a glass and give a toast to their dad and the way that he showed up in the last 20 years of his life. And there's 2 different versions of the way this dinner goes. There's a version where they are gushing. Yep, this is the positive visualization. They are crying their way through how proud they are of the way that I've impacted people and made choices that change the world and have shown them and modeled for them what it means to be a great dad as they are becoming great dads themselves. And there's another version where not all of my children show up, where they feel uninspired to even be present at my 60th birthday party, where those that do show up, when they're asked to speak on the thing that they want to toast, can only muster the word cheers, because there's nothing left for them to say. I get emotional thinking about it. And that negative visualization of what it might mean to not fully live into and live up to the potential that I have in the next 20 years worth of time in a way that might leave my kids not inspired, not having had a model, not having had someone who was every single day shining light into their life, man, that gets me up. That gets me wanting to go and try and pursue what I believe to be everyone's pursuit in life, self-actualization, like fully utilizing the gifts and the potential that have been given to you. And on the days when I don't feel like it, which there are plenty of days I wake up and don't feel like it, I try to connect to what it will feel like if I do get to that birthday, get to that montage at my funeral, get to the end of my life, and haven't painted as full a picture as I know is possible. And that's the thing that usually gets me out of bed and into the gym, gets me out of bed and to out to the kitchen to make something good to eat, fuel my body. But find a way to tap into something, positive or negative visualization, to create the leverage to have you take the action that you'd hoped for in your life.
How does anyone that has such a fulfilled life as you do, privileged, some would say, married to a rock star wife, successful business, 4 beautiful children, successful career, how can anyone feel unfulfilled? Where does that come from?
Well, I think when I was in that kind of crisis point 5 years ago, where here I am at 40, the thing I really put my finger on, well, 2 things. One, I think I was too focused on how the pursuit of my career and how the pursuit of the things that were motivating me were more about me than they were about they. That there's something either in the hardwiring of what it means to be a good man or what it means to have status that in some ways was connecting back to how if I could have the right title or make the right amount of money or have the right kind of access, then I would feel a certain way. And it's hard because I'd heard other people say, those are the things that you think you want, and they in fact will not bring you the kind of happiness you desire. And yet every person inevitably has to go on their own journey to realize, yep, those things, though they're nice, though they, take care of some of the things that might otherwise cause stress in your life, they aren't the things that make you full. And it was in that point where I'm like, you know what? I realize that this thing that is my driver has to be about impact more than about accolades. It has to be more about how many people you can affect, because there is where so many of the answers lie for where fulfillment sits. The second piece, though, for me, and it's really become something that's only in the last few years really come into clear focus. And that is, as I have set out on this ambition to have growth as a real driver in my life, my best years every year as the next year of my life, I have tried to figure out what previously prevented me from having a fantastic year, what previously had me getting in my own way, what previously had me feeling stuck. And one of the things that I can really isolate and say, man, every time I felt this, it has kept me from feeling the way that I hoped to. It's this idea of dissonance, that there was this incongruence that existed between who I'd represented I wanted to be. Like, I have these personal values, these are the things that are important to me, and this is the way I would need to show up to make those values come to life. But when I'm going to sleep in my bed at night, I only showed up as this, right? And there's some space between either who I know I want to be or who I've represented myself to be to the outside world and who I know myself to be when I'm by myself. And that dissonance, that space, the incongruence that exists between who I could be and who I know myself to be is regret, is shame, is unfulfilled potential. It's me not having given everything I could have. And my goal, my mission now is to try and close that space, because you can have all the accolades in the world, you can have all the access in the world, you can have all the privilege in the world. But if you want fulfillment, fulfillment to me comes in integrity between who you'd hope to be, who you proclaim you are, who you know yourself to have been put on this planet by our creator to be, and you showing up as that person consistently so that there's integrity between those two things.
Dave, you made a decision a short time ago to stop drinking or to lay off the booze for a year. Why did you make that decision? What caused that decision? I'm fascinated by the way you engineer yourself, and you know yourself so well, and you know exactly what you need to do, that it would be a disservice to the listeners for you not to talk about this. And that is the only reason I bring it up.
Oh, hey, bring it up. I am super, super excited to talk about it, or frankly, anything. And number one, Peter, I appreciate your kind words, but I am as much a work in progress as every other person who's listened to this. I struggle as much as anyone's struggles, and that struggle is a reflection of my humanity. So if you listening are struggling, good news, you're human. You and I are the same in that respect, and we're going to probably struggle every day for the rest of time. It's how we process that struggle that matters. When I was transitioning into this new world, right? Left what I knew for what I needed, came into this new environment. My identity was challenged. My certainty was challenged. My comfort was challenged. My proximity was challenged. Everything that I previously connected to in terms of what I was now gone. I came into this environment with a casual relationship with alcohol, where I had, for my adult life, had drinks at the end of a long day, have a drink, and maybe it's a super long day, have a couple of drinks. And the factors that were stacking around me in my pursuit for growth, right? I decided that I wanted to leave this area of comfort for an area that was intentionally uncomfortable, because in the discomfort, I would grow. The discomfort was a trigger. And in coming to appreciate how triggers work and how habits work, when I got triggered with anxiety, when I got triggered with insecurity, when I got triggered with imposter syndrome, when I got triggered with overwhelm, all the things that were happening when we first stepped into this new venture, I would have a drink to try and calm some of that, because that was just a part of how I'd historically coped with things that would come up. But the things that were coming up at such a rate that I was, medicating, muting the things that were coming up at a rate that made it unhealthy. And what was interesting is I knew intellectually that I had to leave my harbor, leave the security that I knew for the choppiness of the waters that was out in those waves, for the benefit that growth only exists in those waves. And yet when I would grab a drink, I was attempting to mute the discomfort of those waves. But what I came to realize, and what you as a listener have to also appreciate, when you have a coping mechanism that attempts to mute the bad parts of the experience, you also mute the good part of the experience, right? Alcohol or any coping mechanism is not a local anesthetic. You cannot isolate just the bad parts of the things that you're experiencing. And so while I left comfort for discomfort because of the way it would produce growth, in muting some of the things that were triggering in the discomfort, was also muting the opportunity to grow. I was muting my ability to show up well for my family. I was muting the possibility for me to experience joy, because you can't mute the pain without also muting the joy. So I had to make a decision, and I had made a decision that I had to think differently about how I would respond to the triggers that would inevitably come up. And so when I felt triggered, rather than grabbing a drink, I had to find an alternative that would still produce the reward I was looking for: less anxiety, less fear, less imposter syndrome, less whatever it was. So I'm very all or nothing. I decided, you know what, I'm gonna stop drinking altogether. I was in the midst of writing the book, and put in the book that I was gonna give up drinking for a year. Decided to give up drinking for as long as I now decide to, as much as a year has already come and gone. But I did it because of needing to experience the discomfort, needing to actually take the fruit that comes in the uncomfortable times and process those things so that I could actually learn from them, grow from them. And it was, yes, hard, but it was also unbelievably awesome, because I was able to find an alternative to drinking in doing therapy, in putting on my shoes and running, in processing the things that were triggers instead of suppressing the things that were triggers. And so as much as I was looking for a reward that was less anxiety, less fear, less imposter syndrome, I was able to neutralize those things by going on a long run, by talking to a therapist, by working through and understanding the root of those things in a way that suppressing them never ever made them go away. They just shoved them down and let them fester, and inevitably kick the can until the next time they would be triggered. So running, I'll tell you what, if you are someone who is looking for a good alternative to something like alcohol, I have run a ton. I've run more than 1,000 miles in this last year as a sign of how much the stressors, the triggers still
Sure.
exist, right? They happen all the time. But there is some kind of therapy that happens out on the road that really lets you process the way that you're feeling and understand maybe a little bit better why you're feeling the way you're feeling. That's way healthier. That like gives you so much energy and clarity and hope in a way that doesn't mute all of the things that would have otherwise been, muted if you're going to grab a drink, eat the food, do whatever it might be that is a negative coping mechanism.
You talked about the self hypothesis. You talked about the negative visualization. You talked about therapy. How does someone become so self-aware in each area of our lives to be able to know what to tackle and when to tackle it? Because you're very self-aware, unlike a lot of people that I have interviewed.
Well, what's interesting is I think in part because of my skepticism, I still identify as a skeptic. I was really skeptical of self-help or personal development or anything that in any way, to say that I was interested in help for myself required that I first admit that I need help. And it was hard for me to be in a place where admitting that I needed help didn't somehow indict me of not being good or enough or worthy in the first place. And I've come to appreciate all of us need help. And the only way you can get help is if you humble yourself to appreciate that you need it. But when I was finally at this place where my skepticism was willing to give way and allow myself to start on a journey of getting unstuck in the midst of my weird 30s to 40s bridge crisis moment, I had to understand why. Why do I cling to the things I believe? Where did those beliefs come from? Why, in believing them, do I continue to make decisions that keep me in my own way? And so the practical, pragmatic part of my brain was looking for like the back of the book where the answers live in the answer key. And those answers for me showed up on the couch of a therapist, in the audience at a personal development conference, in the pages of books or inside of podcasts that I might listen to. And so I just started going on this journey to try and uncover as much as I could with a book like Mindset by Carol Dweck. How am I wired in my mindset? A book like The Power of Habit from Charles Duhigg. Why do I do the things that I do that are primarily unconsciously happening in my life? And in going through that work, I was able to now identify, oh, this is why I do what I do. Like if someone says like, what's the first step in a personal development journey? I'll argue that self-awareness is the first step, because you have to know where you're starting from to know where you're going to, to know where you want to go, and to know how you have to address or what you have to address in order to get there. And so I try to stay as like connected to my experience and my struggle. I've really changed the way I think about talking honestly about the things that I am processing and that I'm struggling, because it has changed what previously was sometimes that I would experience things that would sometimes produce shame or would sometimes produce, insecurity. And by not talking about them, that insecurity or shame just would fester in a way that made me feel terrible. And now when I talk about I drank too much, I addressed not drinking too much, there's power in the story of my struggle because I'm able to claim that story. I can stand on top of a platform now of the work that I've done in addressing a thing that I struggled with. And the interesting thing is, like, I for a long time in my life, worried that representing struggle would have people see me as weak. And what it does is it connects me to other people, because struggle is so stinking universal. Every single person listening to this is struggling with something. And if in any way me telling a story about my own personal struggles, and guess what? Like, even though I'm here talking about how I overcame some struggles, I just want to continue to reiterate, I'm still in struggle. I will always be struggling because I am always in pursuit of becoming a better version of myself, which means that I have to continually work through what keeps me from being a better version of myself, which inevitably means that I'm going to keep trudging through struggle. And again, the struggle doesn't make me weak. It just makes me human. And I feel so comfortable now talking about it because it connects me with other people who also have struggled, but it also affords me the gift of in connecting with someone else who has struggled in the way that I do, learning from their experience of how they applied tools to their struggle that I now maybe can take and apply to my own life to get out of my own way, right? I mean, that's the hope, right?
Absolutely.
If you're struggling, whether you're me, Peter, or any of you, right? If you're struggling and you don't tell anyone about it, you guarantee yourself two things. You will feel more alone in your struggle, and you're not, because whatever you're struggling with is a super normal thing that plenty of people struggle with. And you're guaranteeing that you won't get help, because if you were more comfortable in representing your struggle, one, you'd connect to other people who are also struggling in that way, in a way that makes you feel less alone. And you would find in that other person who's struggling like you are, some of the things that they're trying that have been effective in reducing the pain that they experience in that struggle. What a gift.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
get over it. Let's go.
Dave, you are a student of structure. You go to bed at 9 o'clock. You know exactly where your green juice is in the morning. You know where your running shoes are at in the morning. But you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But you also a disciplined journaler. You love to journal. Tell us about that, and why is that so important today?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I made fun of journaling for a long, long time. And in part because I never did it, but I just thought, like most of the things in my skeptic's mind, that it was hooey, that you had to have long hair, that you had to, I don't know what I thought, but I just thought journaling wasn't a cool thing. And then I started journaling. And what's interesting is, in the same way that I had some taboo around sitting on the couch of a therapist, in the same way I had some taboo, right? There is some fruit that has come out of journaling that was unexpected. And in particular, if you are ever able to just take a blank piece of paper and set aside an hour's worth of time. An hour is a long time to journal. Trust me when I tell you, it's a long time to journal. The first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of time when you're journaling will be things that are living already on the top of your consciousness. They are things that you are already thinking, you are already aware of those thoughts. And then when you do not expect it, in a similar kind of way, if you've never experienced therapy, a thing that happens on a couch after a certain number of minutes, when you're talking to a stranger who's objectively listening to you throw up all of your thoughts, all of a sudden when you're journaling, you start now writing some things that you do not even realize where they have come from. And where they have come from is your subconscious. And now that they have been transferred from your subconscious to your consciousness, you can actually shine a light on them and ask, what is this? Where did this come from? Why am I writing this down? Do I need to address this? Is this even real? Like, so many times when I've been in the midst of journaling, something will come up and I'll realize, wow, I was carrying some anxiety about this thing that, now that I can see it written on a piece of paper, is ridiculous. This is not even a real thing. But it was real in my subconscious because I hadn't yet processed it. But now that in journaling or sitting with a therapist, I've brought it out and had a conversation that now, because it's in my consciousness, I can address, I can shine a light on it and realize, oh my goodness, there is absolutely nothing here. This is so ridiculous. Let's move on. What's next? So I encourage you to journal, because you will be surprised at the 20, 25 minute mark, the kind of things that just kind of pop up and you're like, where did that come from? And man, you'll find some peace. You'll find some closure. You'll find some breadcrumbs of the things that you have to actually address or work on, something you might need to spend some time, with contrition or additional conversation, some like work you have to do in a relationship. But if you don't do it, it's going to sit there underneath it all. Man, it's such a gift to get it up and out.
Dave, tell us about Tea with Noah, and how did that come about?
Well, so if you are not familiar, I have a daughter. She's 3 years old.
Absolutely.
She is the very happy final chapter in a long adoption journey of ours. And she's amazing and a total monster because she's, 3. But I don't know, 6-8 months ago, we started this tradition of sitting down and talking through like pretty adult like concepts inside of personal development, because I just want the storytelling and the vernacular and the beliefs that she has to have been established so early on that she never ever has to unlearn the kind of things that most of us as adults have to work against in terms of muscle memory. And also, to be super candid, I mean, I wrote this darn book. As a person who was a skeptic, identify so much with the skeptics that are out there. And so I thought, man, is there a way for me to potentially talk about some of the themes from the book in a way that people may be more open to receiving the teaching? What better way to have someone want to listen to a conversation about limiting beliefs or how resilience is important or whatever it might be than hearing a 45-year-old man speak to a 3-year-old human about these kind of topics in a way that's super cute, in part because of the way that she has very little capacity to totally comprehend these higher level concepts. So we have a good time. Every Monday we put out a new episode. We're recording our next one tomorrow morning. God help us.
She's adorable. She's totally adorable. Dave,
thank you.
Tell us about your book.
So I did write this book. It's called Get Out of Your Own Way, A Skeptic's Guide to Growth and Fulfillment. In it, I tell a whole bunch of lies. There are 20 chapters that are 20 lies that I, at one time or another, believed, that in believing those lies kept me from being the best version of myself. And in finding the truth that made those lies unbelievable, helped me get out of my own way. And I try to tell stories around each of these lies in a way that hopefully makes them super relatable. I think most of them are the kind of lies, limiting beliefs, that most of us have believed in at some point or another. And if, as you see this, is something that you can relate to, it affords you the chance to take some of the advice I give at the end of each chapter for how I got out of my own way and allows you to do the same, get out of your own way, then my work here will have been done. So I'm excited about it. It's been out now for a couple of months. All of the plans around this book totally upended by this darn quarantine that we find ourselves in. But in a strange way, there are, I think, some things that are even more relevant inside of the upside down world that we are living inside of. I don't think that I wrote the book in a way that created this virus, but it in fact maybe has more relevance in part because of it.
What is the most common limited belief that you would find after doing your book?
Well, I mean, I think the chapter on like things are available for other people that aren't available to me, just this like idea that like we in some ways don't believe in ourselves or don't believe in our ability or our capacity to do certain things is a thing that I think all of us as humans experience in one way or another. And so often that comes back to the stories that we tell or have been told and how we challenge the truth of those stories. And so in part, this book ends up being the challenging of these stories that I believed in my life. And I hope that someone leaves the reading of this book feeling like they now can go and challenge some of the things that they may have believed that kept them from thinking that they can have the kind of life, that they can do the kind of work, that they can be the kind of parent that they'd hope to be.
The incredible Dave Hollis on Coming Clean podcast. Stay tuned for this episode coming up. Please make sure and follow him. All his information will be available in the show notes. Dave, thank you. Thank you so much for the time afforded. Thank you for your knowledge and wisdom. And thank you for the opportunity to allow our community to hear your story.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. Good hanging out today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us today on another episode of the Coming Clean podcast. Make sure to join Peter and his next guest on a brand new episode as we continue changing and impacting lives across the world. Share this episode with a friend, follow, subscribe, and leave a review.
Boy, I had to get it fast. Hit a dash in my position, you would never last. Real